Good afternoon. Welcome to Chris Hipkins, Leader of the Opposition. We've had the pleasure of having Chris at a couple of our events in the past. Chris, we welcome you to our new office. You're the first visitor, and we look forward to constructive engagement with you. And this afternoon, we look forward to talking to you on a few issues of national and importance to labor. So welcome. Tell us about what's going on in the event of a few changes that have occurred within the Labour Party caucus in the past few weeks.
Yeah, so we've had quite a lot of change since the election. You'd expect that after losing an election, when you've been in government for 6 years, that a few of our colleagues would be reassessing their own futures. And so we saw Kelvin Davis and Reno Tirakatni earlier in the year saying that they decided they wanted to move on, and just Andrew Little just after the election, and then of course just this past week Grant Robertson has delivered his valedictory speech to Parliament, and he's leaving to be the Vice Chancellor at Otago University. So we get back some colleagues who otherwise wouldn't have been in our team. So Camilla Bellich came back with Andrew Little's departure, and then we've had Tracy McClellan and Shannon Halbert, and now we get Glenn Bennett coming back as Grant Robertson leaves as well.
We have known Grant since the time he came into Helen Clark's office, way back about 20 years ago, or less than 20 years ago. And that was the time when we had Jacinda there. And if you remember, even Paul Goldsmith was in Helen Clark's office at that point of time. I think departure of Grant completes the Helen saga, if you like. And it brings in fresher people. And you as the leader of the party, how do you see the new people coming in? The loss of old colleagues, does it tell on your strength, or would you draw fresh strength from the new people?
I think you've got to get the right balance. You need a bit of experience, so you need some people who have been around for a wee while, but you also do need some new ideas and new energy from time to time. No one is ever indispensable in politics. No one's ever there forever. We're all only ever temporary custodians in the jobs that we hold. And so some renewal is always a healthy thing. And we were very fortunate that in 2017 and in 2020, we got some amazing new MPs joining our team. They've had a bit of experience now, so they've had a bit of time to settle in.
Right.
And as some of our more experienced MPs leave, that gives them an opportunity to step up. So Barbara Edmonds, for example, who's just taken over from Grant Robertson as our finance spokesperson, she came in the group in 2020 as a new MP in 2020. Right. She's already made her mark in Parliament, and already, I think, as our finance spokesperson, people are looking at her and going, she's doing well.
Mr. Collins, what he said about her.
Yeah. And actually, it was very sad, because I think one of the last text messages that he sent was
from him,
was to congratulate her. And so, I think renewal is a healthy thing. Of course, we're going to miss our older colleagues. I saw Andrew Little last week, and it was lovely to see him. And I know that he's still Labour to the core, but he's moving on to new things. Grant Robertson will always be Labour, because it's who he is. Yeah. But he's got some exciting new
he led the student union in Otago University.
He did, and now he's the Vice Chancellor. Yes. So the world goes in cycles, doesn't it?
Yeah. Does this mean a reshuffle?
I did a reshuffle when he announced his retirement. And that meant Barbara Edmonds becoming finance spokesperson, and Glenn Bennett coming back in and picking up the economic development portfolio and so on. So we've already done that. I think now our team, I'm expecting it'll be pretty stable for the next year or so. I'm not expecting there'll be other significant change. So for this year, my message to the team is now really, you've got your portfolios, you've got your brief. So now we've got to get in and do the hard work.
Are you stable in your position as the leader of the party?
Absolutely. Like the Labour team, I've been in the Labour Party when there's been internal dissent, and I've been in the Labour Party when we've been, in a really good shape. And this is actually one of the best, most unified, most constructive Labour teams that I have been part of. There's no major ego there. People actually just want to do the right thing for the party and then for the country. And so I'm feeling very, very well supported by my team.
So there's no challenge to your leadership?
Absolutely not, no. And no evidence to suggest that anyone's even remotely contemplating that.
So everyone you think is committed to rebuilding the party?
Absolutely.
Chris, let me come to the performance of the economy, which is of immediate concern, we seem to have slipped badly in the last quarter. And this morning, as you might have expected, the Prime Minister has blamed you for the economic debacle, as it were, and we've gone into the negative territory. What's your response to that?
Look, I would love to have as much power as to control the global economy. The reality is no New Zealand Prime Minister gets to control that, including him. And the world economy has been going through a very challenging cycle at the moment. And New Zealand is undoubtedly affected by what's going on around the rest of the world. If you look at our major trading partner, China, for example, they are our major trading partner. Yeah. They recovered from the global pandemic far slower than most economists predicted. Them being our major trading partner, that's had an impact on New Zealand's economic recovery from COVID-19. We've seen a cost of living spike, and the Reserve Bank hiking up interest rates in order to deal with the cost of living spike has effectively engineered a recession. Adrian Orr was actually pretty clear, over a year ago when he did that he was aiming to engineer a recession. Right. And we're now experiencing that. So I don't think anyone should be surprised by the numbers that have come out.
What would you have done differently if you had continued? Would you have reversed or tried to avoid this slip in the GDP?
I think, the GDP, the change in GDP is affecting different parts of the economy. It's affecting the economy unevenly. So if you look at dairy exports, for example, Fonterra actually upgraded their results this morning.
And apples yesterday they've started re-exporting.
That's right. And so there are bright spots, but there's no doubt. I think the number one issue at the moment for New Zealand families, regardless of which part of the sector that you're working in, is the cost of living. And the cost of living is undoubtedly still a challenge. So getting inflation back down was going to be one of our number one priorities as a government as well, because any benefit that people get from things like tax cuts are actually quickly disappear if inflation continues at the rate that it has been at the moment.
Two things on that, Chris. One is what Grant Robertson said yesterday, that we are not properly taxed in this country. And then the IMF report yesterday has suggested that New Zealand should look at increasing taxes and bringing in capital gains tax. So if you come back, would you introduce that?
What Grant Robertson also said is that we actually need a grown-up conversation about tax in New Zealand, and not one where political parties try and score points off each other in the process. The reality is we need to face up to some home truths. One of the home truths is people are working really hard and not able to get ahead. And one of the reasons, and tax is a contributing factor to that, because in New Zealand, we rely much more heavily on PAYE, so pay as you earn tax, as a proportion of our tax system than other countries, because we don't have a capital gains tax, we don't have other forms of taxation that supplement that. And that means that people who are working for salary and wages are disproportionately paying into the government's tax take, compared to those who are earning their money off capital gains or off living off wealth. I think we need a grown-up conversation about that, because we shouldn't say that that's fair. So the fact that someone's earning a lot of money off the fact that they have a lot of money and isn't paying tax on that, versus someone who's going out there and working multiple jobs and is paying tax on every cent that they earn, I think that is inequitable. So we will have a different tax policy before the next election. We're working through what that is at the moment. We're looking at the range of options. There's a range of different things we could do to make our tax system fairer. And so I want to take the time to do that. And I want to make sure that when we go into the next election, New Zealanders know exactly what will happen with tax if we form the government again.
There are two elements of fear as far as Labour is concerned, especially since the time Jacinda took charge and you were in charge of COVID. One charge is that Labour tends to tax ordinary workers more. Number two, it tends to destroy the entrepreneurship of employers because of your very stringent employment laws, which people say does not help entrepreneurs to invest. Have you had a chance to look at these, and are you likely to revise these?
So, I think that's a very narrow interpretation of what Labour governments stand for. If you look at what Labour stands for, why we were founded in the first place, it's on the notion that the people who are going out working hard every day, and in many cases working very long hours, working very hard, they should be able to benefit from that by getting ahead. It shouldn't be the case that you have to work every hour that you're awake just to make ends meet and not be able to get ahead. So the Labour movement as a whole, through the unions, through the political wing, the Labour Party, was founded to make work pay, to make sure that by going out and working hard, you could actually create a better life for yourself and for your families, but that also you could have a life. So your life isn't just work. It's also, you've got some benefits to your life as well. And I think that those are the sort of basic bedrock values of the Labour Party that we need to get back to.
Can I interrupt there, Chris?
Yeah.
The problem there is that we are at the bottom end of productivity. It's all good to have work-life balance, which no one objects, but to make people responsible for what they are during the working hours is what the employers are asking.
Absolutely, but we are never going to improve productivity in New Zealand by being a low-wage economy. Low-wage economies actually have worse productivity than high-wage economies. So actually policies that say, for example, the minimum wage, that drive down the pay at the bottom end, they make productivity worse. If we really want productivity gains in New Zealand, we have to front up to the fact that productivity gains come when you pay people more.
I think there's no argument on wages. I think it's a good thing because people are able to lead good lives. I think what the business owners are telling us, small businesses, who are 90% of our economy, is that the laws that you have made over the years have been so stringent. It doesn't help employers. It only helps. It's one-sided. That's what they say. Perhaps I do understand the labor movement, but when it was founded, the situation was different. The society was different. Today it's different. Yeah. Today the labor has a lot more voice.
I think we need to think about how we approach these issues in a 21st century context. Yeah. So in the 20th century, when a lot of our kind of approaches to thinking about these issues really emerged, more people were working in large workplaces. They were working in factories. They were working in large-scale workplaces. Now, people are much more tend to be working much more in smaller businesses, in self-employed arrangements, contracting arrangements, and so on. So that is a big challenge for us. We need to actually change the nature of how we think about these issues, because many of those workers working very hard, they don't necessarily want to go back to working in large workplaces. They actually quite like the flexibility that comes with being self-employed and being their own boss and all those things. But I don't want to see us create an economy where those who are self-employed actually are being exploited, and that is the other risk. So we've got to get the balance right here, and balance is important. We've actually got to make sure that they're getting the benefits of being self-employed, but that they're not in a position where they have no choice but to be self-employed and effectively be exploited in order to make ends meet.
I think we should continue this conversation over the next 2.5 years and see how. Chris, what are the three things that you agree with what the coalition government has done? And I know you may not have agreed with anything else because your job is to hold the government to account, and as the leader of the opposition, even more so. What are the three things that you like, if at all, what the coalition government has done?
Well, thus far, mostly they've just been cancelling and stopping things that we were doing. So, of course, I don't agree with them doing that. I think that they've identified some problems where I agree with the problem definition, even if I don't necessarily agree with how they're proposing to solve it. So just let's look at issues just this week. Just this week, they've talked about antisocial tenants in state houses, for example. Yeah. I agree that's a problem. I've dealt with that issue in my electorate where
that got out of hand, hasn't it?
Where you've got good neighbours saying, these state house tenants are making my life miserable. Why aren't you doing something about that? I don't necessarily agree with the solution. I don't necessarily agree that evicting
people... So you don't agree with the eviction?
Well, evictions as the first port of call, no, I don't. Because actually, if you transfer those tenants to a different house, you often remove them from that situation. And in 90% of the cases, that solves the problem. But evictions should be on the table. It should be an option, but it shouldn't be the first option that you go to. Because it can affect children, it can affect school communities, it can affect a whole lot of other things. And so I think, but it should be on the table as an option. But I think the problem and the way they've identified the problem is correct. I think in other areas, the youth offending, ram raiding, smash and grabs, young people getting into trouble. I agree that's been one of the big emerging problems in the last few years. But I don't necessarily think that sending those kids to boot camp is going to solve the problem. Because particularly if you send them to a boot camp, they actually have a good experience at boot camp and then they go back to the houses that they came from in the first place. They're just going to go back to the same problem that we're trying to get them away from. We've got to give them a better future. So yeah, I don't disagree with a lot of the problems that the government have identified and that they want to solve. I just don't think they've necessarily, they've got very easy to understand solutions. They're very bumper sticker, slogan driven solutions. They're not going to solve complex problems that way. Youth offending is a much more complicated problem than that. Now, I'm on it. I dwell on this one for a minute, because if you think about the ethnic community and the Indian community, I've visited a lot of those businesses that have been affected by the youth offending. I've gone into dairies, for example, where the dairy owners are they're the owners, they're the workers, they live in the business, it is their whole life. So when a young offender steals a car and drives it through the front of their shop, they're not just destroying their business, they're destroying their home in many cases. So I think this is a really serious issue. But I don't think that the boot camps are the answer. I think the answer is to get the kids out of trouble. Because I would far rather that we had fewer people experiencing that in the first place, rather than us punishing the young people after they've already offended. We've got to get in earlier and stop that from happening. So because that's how businesses will be safe.
Do you think law and order has got worse after the coalition government came in?
I think law and order's got worse since the pandemic. And that's not just in New Zealand but around the world, because of course I've been grappling with this. Last year when I went to some of those international meetings and I spoke to my international counterparts, we were all talking about this. Society now is much more on edge than it was 4 or 5 years ago, and I think the pandemic's had an impact of that. People are now shorter to lose their temper than they were 5 years ago. I was talking to a major business leader, who's in a very customer-focused industry, just this morning, and they were saying that people are they're seeing much more aggression in their business from their customers than they would have 5 years ago. That's an international phenomenon. And so I think we've got to really have answers to that. And they're not going to be quick, easy fixes. Right. Because it's not just, and here's the other thing, it's not just young people, and it's not just people from lower socioeconomic areas. Actually, there's some middle class and even wealthier people who are quicker to temper now than they used to be. So everyone, I think, has to take this seriously.
So you don't agree with the Maori Health Authority being removed? You don't agree with the vaping removal? Do you agree with those policies?
Actually, some of the decisions they took on vaping just this week were continuations of what we were doing anyway. And if anything, they're probably actually less than some of the things that we thought we should do on vaping.
Increasing the fines is okay for you?
I think increasing the fines is fine, but actually that's all very well, but how are they going to enforce it? Yeah. They've only got 15 people enforcing the vaping laws across, you'd actually know the number better than me. Thousands of businesses involved in selling vapes, 15 people enforcing the law. It's going to be a bit problematic. And I want to, again, acknowledge that there's some really responsible businesses out there whose good behaviour is being punished by the bad behaviour of others. So I think enforcement's important.
What about the Maori Health Authority?
Look, I think we've got to get real. Our Māori health outcomes in New Zealand are worse than for almost every other group of New Zealanders. And if we're going to fix that, we need a different approach, and a by Māori, for Māori approach to health. I think Māori actually understand their health needs better than I do.
But don't you think it's better to have an overall healthier health policy than to have a discriminated approach?
I don't think it is a discriminated approach, because I think when you've got Māori health providers providing support to Māori communities, the evidence that I've seen is that they're actually supporting other communities as well. So let's take vaccination. We have the fastest rollout of the COVID vaccine that we've ever rolled out of vaccination in New Zealand's history. Our Māori health providers, when you went along, I got one of my vaccinations at a marae. So they were vaccinating everyone that came through the door, not just Māori New Zealanders. So I think an approach that says let's support.
Vaccination was different, Chris, because even the Indian community went out in very large numbers and helped the government, the Gurudwara set up.
Yeah.
They vaccinate. They help Maori Pacifica to get vaccinated. I think vaccination was a different era. People were very scared of what COVID might do. No one knew what this pandemic was about.
Yeah.
I think that's a different issue. But I suppose I might come back to you a little later and then ask you more about what do you think of a better integrated approach to health.
Oh, I think it's essential. So here's the thing. I went to see my GP this week. I had to go and see my GP. And it was the first time I've actually seen my GP in person for about 5 years, because the way GPs have operated now has changed hugely because of the pandemic. So now we do it much more through telehealth and so on.
Tell me about it.
But there are better ways of delivering healthcare now. If you think about it, when you're sick, what the health system used to say, well, you're sick, so you should go and sit in a room with a whole lot of other people who are sick. There are better ways of doing it than that. We need a more holistic approach to healthcare. And it's also got to be one that's focused on prevention first. Stopping people getting sick is better than providing treatment after they've gotten sick. And there's a lot of people showing up in our hospital emergency departments with illnesses that are avoidable. We would have shorter wait times for emergency departments if we actually stopped the people who were there with avoidable illness ending up there in the first place.
There are so many issues that we need to talk about, but we will do that in due course. Coming on to the international scene, do you think the coalition government is pursuing the right path as far as Ukraine is concerned and as far as Palestine issue is concerned?
I think they could have been a little more assertive on the Palestinian issue earlier on. I think the position that they've reached a bit now, which is to really express concern about Israel's position, is the right position.
But Israel is not in a mood to listen to anybody.
I know, but I still think we should articulate New Zealand's independent position, from our values, and I think that they are doing that now, and I think that's good. They were a bit slow to get to that. I think on Ukraine, I think we should continue to provide as much support as we can there. I think on the relationship with India, I think the government wanted...
Your government has been accused of actually disengaging with India.
Well, I think on the...
Not your government, your under Jacinda.
Yeah, I think that's difficult. Our international relations were very difficult during the COVID period because none of our ministers were travelling. And we would have had more ministers travelling to India had we had that opportunity. But for 2.5 years of the 6 years we were in government, we couldn't do that. When the borders reopened, we did have ministers going to India. And I had intended to go to India in the first 100 days after the election because I think it is an important relationship. So I think what the government are doing now of working on building the relationship. When I spoke to Prime Minister Modi, that's what we had agreed we needed to do. Yeah. We agreed that we needed to focus on building the relationship. Before we start talking about trade agreements, we needed to build the relationship. And I think that's what the current government should do. Early signs are that's what they're doing, so that's a healthy thing.
Would you like to go to India? Because as the leader of the opposition, Simon Bridges did.
Yeah, I certainly, if the opportunity arises and we can put forward a useful program to go to India, then certainly I would look to do that.
Because I think the Indian government has to know that the Labour Party is not averse to trade with India.
Oh, I think trade with India is essential. But there are a few things that we do need to be clear on. As a government, we were not willing to enter into trade agreements that excluded dairy, because dairy is such an important industry for New Zealand.
You don't have it with UK.
Well, there is provision for dairy in there. It's not as good as we'd like it, but dairy is in the agreements with both the UK and with the European Union.
But it's non-implementable as far as dairy is concerned with Europe and the UK. You've signed a deal, but you can't enforce the non-tariff part for agricultural exports from New Zealand.
Oh, I don't agree with you, actually. I think that the businesses that I've spoken to are already looking at ways that they can make the most of those free trade agreements with both the UK and
No, I agree.
EU.
The free trade agreements are fine. What I'm talking about is export of dairy products. Just like India doesn't want to grant concessions. You can export. There's no problem in exporting. But if you want tariff concessions, they're not willing to give on certain areas. That's what Europe and UK has also said, hasn't they?
Well, with the European Union, there are opportunities for New Zealand dairy exporters in the UK. They're not as, of course, we'd like more. We would have liked more, but I think the door is now open. It's not open as wide as we would like it, but we've managed to open it. I think in terms of India, a free trade agreement, a comprehensive free trade agreement, will take some time, but I actually think there are some earlier wins that we could get that would be of mutual benefit. air services, for example, improving air connectivity between New Zealand and India would be a great thing. Direct flights between Auckland and India would be a very good thing for New
Foreign
Zealand.
Minister has mentioned it, of India, has mentioned it even last week, that he would like to have that. But the problem is it's all in the private sector, and private sector is always commercial. You talk to Air New Zealand, they would say the same thing.
That's right.
But I think, Chris, in the larger scheme of things, if a person like you, the leader of the opposition, and certainly the future Prime Minister, if you were to make signals to India, send signals to India that you mean business, that would be a great help.
Well, certainly, if an opportunity arises to engage with India in whatever form that might look like.
We'll try and find something.
Of course, that's something. That
Lastly, Chris, as far as the Indian community is concerned, there has been a feeling. This I'm not able to substantiate it, but I'm only conveying what the impression was, that the Labour government did not engage well with the community, the Indian community. So it was a great thing that you came to our event, to the Business Awards, because the businesses saw you. And you were the Prime Minister till midday that day when you came to our Business Awards. There was a lot of good feeling that they felt that the Labour Party is business friendly. This is the signal that you send when you're present. So we hope that you will engage more and more with it's a growing community. They are getting more and more into the wealth creation sector.
I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of reasons for it, COVID-19 and others. I think it is fair to say that our government didn't engage with parts of the community as much as we should have, and the ethnic community, the Indian community, good examples of that. I hope that people will see since the election, since we've had a little bit more time, that we're working on fixing that. Just last week, I went to the Indian Excellence Awards in Christchurch, which a wonderful thing
I saw that.
To actually see that ceremony in the South Island.
The High Commissioner was there.
Yeah, our Indian community, of course, is spread all over the country. They're not just here in Auckland, and so I want to do as much of that as I possibly can.
Certainly. And on that note, Chris, we hope that you will be with us on more occasions, so that we can talk to our people through. You can talk to our people through us. And if there's a parting message that you would like to deliver, please go ahead. No interruptions.
Yeah, look, I think it's a challenging time for New Zealanders, and I do want to say to particularly our small business community, I know how hard it is at the moment, and I know how hard those businesses are working at the moment, but there is reason to feel optimistic. We are a fantastic country. We've got lots of opportunities ahead. Keep going, I guess, is my message. I know it's tough, but keep going, because I think we will get through this. And there is so much to look forward to as a country if we can get through this. And I think we can. And I guess the final message too would be look out for each other, because, even little things like supporting your local businesses make an enormous difference.
Thank you, Chris. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.